What do you think that was at Roswell? What do you think crashed?
Oh, I can tell you precisely what crashed. Why it crashed, I can't tell you. It was a device containing 3 entities, which were part of the device, essentially. They were biological entities, and supposedly one of them was still alive when it was brought to right, but General Exon didn't say anything about that. The only thing, and he didn't tell me this directly, he told one of my relatives this, that he had held one in his arms, and it was like a big insect. That was his precise description. My uncle said that he didn't refer to the bodies. He referred only to the debris and the object, which he said was somewhat intact. And so they had, from Roswell, partially intact object and some debris and bodies.
3 bodies.
3 bodies. And Walter Haut, who was the press officer at the Army Air Base in Roswell, left an affidavit, which was published by his family after he died, describing all of this, the bodies and so forth, in great detail. And he said to me, I went out to Roswell to talk to him. He said he wouldn't talk about the bodies. I asked him point blank, were there bodies? And he was simply silent. He wouldn't say yes, he wouldn't say no, because he didn't like to lie. He was a very straight-up guy, straight-ahead guy, Walt was. And so he left this is as much as he could do. And Colonel Jesse Marcel left a videotape with, thanks to Stanton Friedman, where he describes in detail the debris that he found and brought in to his home in his station wagon with his little boy, who Dr. Marcel passed away just a couple of years ago, who attested to this story also.
Right.
So it happened.
Have you ever heard Annie Jacobson's account of this crash?
I don't think it's correct. Yes, I do know it very well.
Mm-hmm. It seems really compelling. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that theory, but it's interesting that she's the only one that talks about it, and no one else seems to appreciate it or take it seriously at all. You think the guy who told her, essentially for people that are listening, Annie Jacobson wrote in her book Area 51 that there was an engineer of a private aerospace company or something like that who was working in Arizona or Nevada who told Annie under anonymity that the device that crashed in Roswell was a Wright brothers or something engineered craft, like some sort of human-made flying saucer with children that were surgically manipulated to look like aliens from the Nazi Mengele, his name was.
Yeah, I know the story, but go ahead and tell it because
so people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah,
and essentially, Stalin sent the craft over here, remote controlled it over here, and crashed it with these children, these Russian children that were deformed by this Nazi, to sow chaos within the United States.
Okay, I can tell you a lot about that and where that comes from.
And let me just finish the end of it. She asked this guy, Stephen, you could probably find his name if you just Google Annie Jacobson, engineer Roswell. I find out who his name actually was. She actually talked about it on Lex Friedman's podcast recently. And she asked him later, she goes, why wouldn't you make this public? Why is this such a big secret? Why are you waiting until you're essentially on your deathbed to tell me this? Why didn't you guys say, because if you guys would have let the public know when this happened, it would not hurt the image of America. It would hurt the image of Russia because it makes them look like, sickos. It makes them look like sinister people. The fact that they would do something like this. And his response to Annie was, because we started doing the same thing as soon as we found what they did. As soon as we found out that they were altering children and doing this stuff in Roswell or in Russia, we started experimenting with the same thing. And we know that I think it was the 70s and 80s, that there was projects going on the East Coast of the United States where they were injecting children with plutonium and all kinds of nuclear material to test on them. And I think Bill Clinton shut it down in like the early 90s.
I don't know anything about that, and therefore I can't speak of it. But what I can speak of is what I do know. I'll circle back for a moment to General Exon and my uncle. Before I published Communion, I knew nothing about General Exon, and I knew nothing about my uncle's work in the Air Force. Nothing. Nobody in the family did. I knew one thing about it. One thing, which was that he had seen when they blew off a gigantic hydrogen bomb. The Russians did in 1959, I think. And I happened to be staying at an aunt and uncle's house in Washington at the time with a friend, and suddenly my uncle shows up. The aunt and uncle were on vacation in Spain, and he told me. I asked him because I knew he was an intelligence officer. I just didn't know what he did, and I said, "What do you think of this massive H-bomb that went off? They blew off in Russia." He said, "Oh, I saw it. It's the size of a football field." And I thought, he saw it? How did he see it? And I said, "When did you see it?" He just laughed and didn't say anything more. So he was in other words, he was deep in this in Air Force intelligence, apparently.
Right.
Now, after Communion was published, he suddenly telephones me. At this point, he's in retirement at Retirement Village in Lackland, at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. He says, "Whitty, I want you to come down. I've got some things I would like to talk about that have to do with your book." And I hung up and I said to Ann, my wife, I said, "Mickey's going to talk to me about my book. Can you believe this?" And so I go down, and he and his wife and me and Ann have a lunch. And he talks about the debris and the object, as he put it. I didn't ask him directly about bodies because it didn't occur to me at the time. I hadn't done much. I hadn't been to Roswell yet, for example. Right. And I had been to Roswell, but I hadn't. In any case, the bodies didn't come up. He may have alluded to him. I've never been sure. I'm trying to remember if I always say that he didn't say anything about the bodies, and I don't think I asked him anything about them directly. I did ask General Exon about them, and he said that he and General Exon had worked on this project at Wright-Patt, at Wright Field at the time, and Air Materiel, under General Twining, and who was the head of Air Materiel at the time. And he told me about the debris, and as I say, I think he alluded to the bodies, may not have. And he introduced me to General Exon, who I talked to on the phone a number of times, who told me a great deal about the whole thing. He knew much more than Mickey did, because he'd been a higher level officer at the time. I think Mickey was a major and he was a colonel at the time. And General Exon said, and I'm quoting him, and he's been quoted in a unfortunate public interview that's in a book by Don Schmidt and Randalls and Schmidt, that everyone from Truman on down, as he put it, knew that what we had found was not of this world within 24 hours of our finding it. Now, let's go back to the story of the altered children.
Yes. And by the way, just a quick aside, the guy's name is Alfred O'Donnell. That's and he was an EG&G engineer. This is the guy who told
EG&G Rotron.
So can you copy and paste his name into a new tab so we can get some more background on that guy? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So this is where I think that story comes from. Immediately, here is the situation, the world situation as it stood at that time. Stalin has 4.5 million soldiers, fully equipped, largely with top-notch American equipment, on what is now beginning to be called the Iron Curtain Line. NATO, or rather the Allies are telling Churchill and I guess de Gaulle and Truman that this army can move across Western Europe in 6 weeks, and in all probability will be able to successfully invade England because the West has demobilized and they have not. So what is preventing them? Why don't they do it? There's one thing on the planet that's preventing them. It is the 509th Bomb Wing at Roswell, which is believed to be equipped with nuclear weapons.
Right.
And can deliver them to Russia. And Stalin knows that his radars and his anti-aircraft systems are not sufficiently robust to guarantee that all of the planes will be destroyed. Right. So the biggest secret on the planet upon which the door of history is hinged is that bomb wing right there at Roswell.
Right.
Do they really have the bombs or not? What is the situation? Now, I was told by somebody it was at the base, and he was an older man, and I don't remember his name. I'm not in the business of not saying names, by the way. I try to say all the names I can remember.
Okay.
But this is a guy who he told me that they did not have all of the planes. Only a couple of the planes were actually operational at that time. And the result of this was the immediate thought when they found the debris and wreckage 30 miles north of Roswell, an apparent balloon, the fear was that he had sensitive equipment on there that could have detected the level of radiation coming from the base if he'd gotten near enough and determined from that whether or not there were really bombs on the base. And this caused a tremendous upset. That's why when the disk story was being disseminated by Walter Haut, it was suddenly killed by the Pentagon because they weren't afraid of aliens. They'd never even heard. Understand, in those days, that idea was not something people thought about. Mm-hmm. People from another planet, we don't hardly even, maybe they'd think we were from Mars or something. They had no information, nothing like what we have now about outer space. Mm-hmm. So their immediate thought was, these were Russians. And because they were small, the assumption was they were children. And then the cover story was the story that they were altered children.
Yeah, but that was never the story about them being altered children was never released into the public officially.
No, but it went all over the Air Force. It went all over the Air Force because my uncle mentioned it. He said that was the story that was told in the Air Force. That was what was told.
Okay.
And because he was definite, Art was definite about the bodies. He said they were not human at all. And in fact, well, I know they weren't human. I'm quite certain of it. And
you know for a fact.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Well, it'll all come out.